Hey, this is Josh with Analog Reviews, and today we're going to be taking a look at the top 10 games of the year. Joining me today are Nathan,
Hey.
Trent,
Hello.
Val,
How's it going?
Andrew,
Hey.
and our special guest, VerticalSprite.
Hey, how you doing? You alright?
So first thing, let's just get out of the way. What was everyone's game of the year? Trent, what was your game of the year?
Metro Last Light, actually.
What'd you like about it?
I like the combination of atmosphere, the method in which the story is actually told, and it was a massive improvement over the previous game.
Alright. Nathan, which one did you like?
It was pretty close for me between Metro and Rayman Legends, but overall, I'm going to go with Rayman.
Val?
I'm going to go with Rayman Legends as well.
Andrew, what was your game of the year?
I thought Ni no Kuni was a pretty worthy nomination for this year.
Did the journey ever end for you?
I suppose so.
Took the full year. And VerticalSprite, what was your game of the year?
I've played a lot of good games, but the one that took me by surprise was Outlast. Definitely Outlast. From start to finish, just constantly terrifying me.
My personal game of the year was Rayman Legends. I see that as being the only timeless game this year. This is a game that will be fun going into 5 years from now, 10 years from now. It's the best platformer I've played since Donkey Kong Country 2. So we seem to have a pretty good agreement on Rayman for the most part on everyone's list. VerticalSprite, make a case for Outlast. Do you think it should be game of the year? Did you play Rayman?
I played Rayman Origins. I played that through to completion. I never played Rayman Legends, but I can certainly see why it was on Game of the Year. The art style and direction, it was a phenomenal platformer from start to finish, I think.
Yeah, it was great. And Legends really just took everything Origins had in it. It actually put the entire Origins game in it, and they remastered it. Plus, they had the whole Rayman Legends game in it. It was a pretty crazy game.
Yeah, it has a ridiculous amount of content, like 120 different stages, all the stages from Origins, like another 70 from Legends, challenges, just tons of stuff to keep you playing.
Alright, so anyone disagree with Rayman getting the official #1 spot this year? It made pretty high on all our lists.
I don't disagree with it at all. In fact, it was my number 2. But I think I was the only other one here that actually played Outlast. And I just would like to say it was a really good game, really strong. I enjoyed the atmosphere. I thought it had really solid graphics for its price point. In fact, it was more of an independent release. I will say the only thing that kind of diminished it for me personally was that it had a very high reliance on jump scares. So for me, probably toward like the last third of the game, it wasn't quite as scary just because it was relying on all of the same tactics. That was my personal take on it, but definitely a really notable game and worth playing if you're a big survival horror fan.
Yeah, I love survival horror, but jump scares don't really do it for me. It's the easiest way to get scares out of people, and there's so many better ways to do it. It doesn't stay with you like other classic survival horror games. Yeah, so Rayman's #1. What's your number 2 be? Anyone got any cases?
Well, I think we've unofficially established Metro Last Light. That seems to be the next most mentioned game. I know Nathan mentioned Last Light. It was my game of the year. I know Val really enjoyed it.
It was really close for me between Rayman and Metro. So yeah, I would definitely like Metro to be number 2.
Well, make a case for Ni no Kuni.
Never end.
I don't know, I thought the game was really well enriched, an immersive world that just had small details of the art, the music, and small scavenger hunts that you could say. You stamp these little cards and go around and explore different maps of the area and discovering new things and items to create through alchemy and such. It just was an overall immersive experience that I thought was gratifying.
I had it as my number 2 as well. I didn't play Metro though, so that might have been higher. But yeah, it's like the ultimate Pokemon game. It's pretty much what Pokemon should have been at this point in time, instead of just rehashing the same thing they've been doing for 15 years. Best JRPG I played in a while.
I put a few hours into Ni no Kuni just last night. Unfortunately, wasn't able to finish it, obviously, with so many games coming out this year. I have to say, as a Studio Ghibli fan, I was really impressed that Ghibli feel, that really whimsical childhood fantasy kind of storyline material that they have. I thought it translated over really well from what I saw, and I really enjoyed the fact that it felt more like a Ghibli game than a level 5 game, and especially given the fact that JRPGs have been so disappointing over probably the past decade for me. Pretty refreshing to see
VerticalSprite, did you play either of those? Do you have any opinion on them?
For me, I haven't actually got a PlayStation 3, but I did see the reviews on Ni no Kuni, and again, you know, the graphics on it just looked that stylised. And of course, a lot of the accents were Welsh as well, so being from the UK, you know, that goes a long way. Unfortunately, on the Xbox, there aren't that many JRPGs, so that would be a good gap to fill.
Yeah, there's not much at all.
Actually,
What about Metro? Did you try that out?
I've played the original Metro, and again, it's a fantastic story the way that they do it. And I know that with Metro 2034, there was a lot of criticism with it being not as conclusive as the first one, but the direction that it takes it in, it's a lot more gruesome, and I think it works for.
And Trent, you were saying something?
Oh, never mind. I was just going to make a point about early Xbox and JRPGs, but not really particularly important.
The only great JRPG that comes to mind on the Xbox that I can think of right now was Tales of Vesperia. I think that's probably the best JRPG for the Xbox.
Lost Odyssey was reasonably decent as well.
I got kind of bored with that, the whole built-in poem thing it had, where you just sit there for like half an hour listening to a poem. And then the dungeons just went on and on. They were like 6 hours long. Just greatly preferred the pacing of Tales of Vesperia.
Yeah, I have no problem with Metro being number 2. I didn't play it, so I can't personally comment on it. I had Ni no Kuni as my number 2, but I mean, Andrew and I were the only two that had Ni no Kuni really high up. I'm willing to concede that for number 2. Did you play Metro, Andrew?
I did not, but from what I hear tonight, I might as well take a look and see what it brings.
Josh would like Metro a lot. It builds up a good atmosphere. It's scary. I actually like the narrative, and I got more into it than I did the first one.
Yeah, I think you would enjoy it, Josh. It actually kind of feels like a survival horror at parts, and I know that's like one of your favorite genres, and there really hasn't been much aside from Dead Space, and Outlast is kind of like a different style of horror. It has that classic feel to it, Metro, like when you go on the surface.
Yeah, I'm going to try next year.
Yeah, I will say one of the strongest things for me about Metro is the way that it builds its world. And I don't think it necessarily gets enough credit for this. Anytime you're telling a story in a visual medium, it's better to show than to tell. And with video games, I think what more developers need to learn is it's better to allow players to interact with the world than it is to tell them or show them the world. And I really like how you enter kind of those hub areas in Metro Last Light, and you're allowed to kind of wander around, explore. You're able to eavesdrop on people's conversations. You're able to look for details in the environment that are kind of telling about what's happened to the world after this nuclear holocaust. And I think it does that in a really effective way that few games actually are able to accomplish.
Yeah, definitely. It's really immersive and paced really well.
Yeah, Rayman was the only game this year that was like in the 9 range for me. I mean, Ni no Kuni had plenty of flaws, especially with its end game and how its combat worked. It was just outside of it. So, what were you going to say, VerticalSprite?
I was just going to say, with Metro 2033, you're talking about the immersion. There was even an option on there to listen to the entire game in Russian, wasn't there? You know, if you wanted to just play the game and listen to their language.
Correct, and actually that's the way I played. Well, I started to play Last Light that way. Unfortunately, I found that it's not entirely subtitled. Last Light wasn't, so I was a little disappointed by that because I do like hearing the Russian dialogue instead of the kind of slightly cheesy American Russian accent. Yes.
Yeah, I'm going to be learning Russian so I can play it in Russian next few months. Alright, so we have Metro number 2. It seems like Ni no Kuni is number 3. Everyone's got a pretty high. Bioshock and Last of Us kind of seem like the next contenders for 4 and 5. VerticalSprite had Bioshock at number 2. What'd you like about that game?
Well, short and sharp, the storytelling. It's not many games manage to tell a complete story without looking at pieces of paper or looking at posters constantly, but Bioshock did tell a story through nothing more than the character that you're working with or escorting talking to you. And I think the only other game that come close to the storytelling in that sense was Left 4 Dead 2, ironically.
Yeah, again, I mean, Bioshock Infinite for me is very similar to Metro in terms of the way that it conveys its story, in the sense that it puts you in the center of the events, and instead of constantly giving you expository dialogue or whatever, I mean, it's allowing you to see and interact with the events at hand. And I thought that Elizabeth was a really great companion, a really likable companion, You weren't babysitting her. She felt capable. It's not like Ashley in Resident Evil 4 where I just wanted to like shoot her in the face and move on with it. She was a really likable character.
I know that the ending in Bioshock Infinite, it was a bit confusing to some, and even to me. I had to look onto the forums to see what it all meant. But as far as the actual game went, you talking about the artificial intelligence of Elizabeth, she was one of the best companions in any game ever, and I think that either made or broke the game. And for me, it certainly made it.
Yeah, I'd have to agree. And involved with such part of the storyline as well.
Well, what do you think of Bioshock? You and me had it somewhat low on our list. So did Nathan. We all had it at number 6, actually. It's kind of funny. What do you think of it?
I mean, I liked it, but the gameplay didn't seem revolutionary. I liked jumping around on the rails, but it just seemed to be very enclosed when you did that. It didn't feel as open as they kind of said it would be.
The gameplay was certainly its weak point. It didn't offer a whole lot that was new in terms of gameplay, and it was outdated. I didn't think the story was that strong either. I liked Bioshock 1 a lot, but I really didn't care for Infinite. The story, the ending wasn't really confusing to me. It just... And I saw the Comstock twist like a third of the way through the game.
Yeah, for me, it's actually pretty close between The Last of Us and Bioshock Infinite. The main problem for both of those games for me is the gameplay. Just felt a bit underwhelming. Bioshock Infinite was a bit too easy. Like, I beat the game without dying once, and I don't really consider myself to be that great at first-person shooters. I just felt that The Last of Us had a stronger story between the two, and that's like the main selling point between those two games is the narrative.
I think a lot of people get bogged down with Bioshock Infinite in terms of looking at it from just its plot points. I think Bioshock Infinite is best enjoyed from a narrative perspective when you take into account the thematic content. I mean, it's a story about redemption, about absolution, and I think that there's some fantastic imagery in the game that reinforces that. Motifs. I mean, you start the game and you have to be baptized to enter the city. Baptism, from a religious standpoint, is it's basically being reborn, being absolved of your previous sins, and in the end, that was what it was all about. Booker absolving himself of what he would become as Comstock. Although I will say that there was a big kind of logical error, because as I understand quantum theory of parallel universes and whatnot, is everything's going on simultaneously. So if your Booker, the Booker that you play, is killed, then there are an infinite number of universes with an infinite number of variables and possibilities. So inevitably there would be other universes in which Comstock would exist. So even though your character absolves himself of his past wrongdoings, it doesn't do much for the Bookers that are in these infinite universes. But again, I mean, from a thematic standpoint, it's a very satisfying narrative. Maybe not so much from a plot point, more of a face value progression.
Yeah, that was my problem with the ending.
Yeah, it definitely does have some contradictions in there, or just contradicts itself, like you just mentioned in the ending. And I think it's kind of a step down from the first Bioshock. First Bioshock definitely had a lot stronger atmosphere. Rapture was
the first Bioshock
memorable.
Everything made sense, like the what are the magic things called in that?
Plasma.
The atom, the plasmids, whatever. They made sense in the context of the first Bioshock game. They didn't really make sense in a society that's built around religion and all this stuff. I mean, science and that typically don't go together that well. So there's some issues with that.
VerticalSprite, what did you think of the first Bioshock in relation to Infinite? Which did you prefer?
I think the original Bioshock, if it was released in 2013, if it was the very first one ever, that would definitely make the top one for me, because the would you kindly twist in Bioshock I never saw coming, and there was never any clues to it, but the clues were always there. They were just never obvious.
Yeah, the would you kindly twist and everything about Bioshock 1 was much better in my opinion. Like, there was a spot in the Hall of Heroes in Bioshock Infinite that just gave away who Comstock was. If you look at the timelines it says when Comstock was born, and in the loading screens it has Booker's birth date, and they coincide the exact same. So as soon as I saw the Hall of Heroes, I'm like, oh, he's Comstock.
Yeah, I didn't catch that, but I definitely thought the first Bioshock was superior in every way. It had stronger atmosphere, more interesting environments. Gameplay was more challenging, had a much wider variety of enemies. felt creepy at points. I preferred the story. I really like that twist as well.
I just want to bring that up because I know from talking to you guys at separate times, it seems like the biggest problem with Bioshock Infinite is that it kind of stands in the shadow of the original Bioshock. To the point that Josh was just making about Vigors versus Plasmids, it seems that in some ways, kind of the point that Josh seemed to be making was that Vigors are kind of inserted into the game to maintain its identity as a Bioshock game. It doesn't feel as much of a natural gameplay component as it did in the original Bioshock. So I just really wanted to kind of bring that up, and I was just kind of curious if we kind of divorced Bioshock Infinite from the original Bioshock. I was just wondering, where it would stand in people's minds instead of looking at it as a sequel to one of our top games of this entire generation.
It's hard to not compare it to Bioshock.
Even if I were to think of it as a standalone title and not compare it to Bioshock 1, if we're discussing the number 4 slot for the top 10 list and comparing The Last of Us and Infinite, the main problem between the two was the gameplay, and The Last of Us just had a much stronger narrative.
Yeah, we haven't talked about The Last of Us. That's the other.
I'll go ahead and kick off the Last of Us discussion, just because I actually had The Last of Us rather low on my list. I had it at the number 9 slot, and this to me is why Bioshock stands a bit higher than The Last of Us in my book, because they do both have some gameplay shortcomings. But in terms of narrative, I enjoy the fact that Bioshock allows me to be a part of the story and interact with story elements directly, whereas, unfortunately, The Last of Us employs Naughty Dog's signature cinematic storytelling style. And I felt that there were a number of scenarios in which I was watching things occur in cutscenes, which, if I were designing the game, I would have found a way to give the player some control and let them be a part of those scenes. The one that always stands out to me is there's a scene in The Last of Us where you're with these two brothers, and in the cutscene, one of them becomes one of these fungus zombie people and attacks. Joel's forced to kill him, but this kid's older brother doesn't want Joel to do it. And I just thought, well, what if you play as Ellie in that scene, and you're supposed to look for some sort of supplies or something, and there's a conversation between Ellie and the younger kid who eventually turns, and all of a sudden, he stops talking, and out of nowhere abruptly attacks you as the player, and you're forced to scramble and survive and wait for Joel to basically fend off the kid's older brother and allow Joel, to execute the younger kid. Like, I thought that would have been, something that would have made that story a bit more powerful and a bit more interesting in terms of being a video game narrative. From a cinematic standpoint, the game works, and the game has a brilliant conclusion, but just the presentation of the narrative to me in Bioshock was stronger.
For me personally, I care about the narrative as a whole. I mean, the storyline in The Last of Us is so much more memorable than Bioshock, and its resolution is so much better. And the characters, I just like the characters better. They're more developed, they're more realistic. Facial work on them, it was amazing. It had a weak beginning, but I thought it was the best story of any game this year.
Yeah, by far, the character development really it grew throughout the entire game, and it made you more impactful on what decisions are these two going to make in the end.
What about you, Val?
What I really liked that we haven't really talked about for The Last of Us was the multiplayer. I really liked
That's true, it did have good multiplayer.
Limit of ammo you had, and how you had to create these weapons as you played, and the whole being silent throughout the entire game. A lot of other multiplayer games don't do it that well, and it really had a huge focus on co-op.
I thought the gameplay in it was a little better too, in general.
There's definitely a unique multiplayer component in The Last of Us. Like you said, there really isn't many games that do that, where you're always low on ammo, you spawn with like 6 bullets, and it has a heavy reliance on melee weapons and remaining silent, and just has that whole stealth element to it. Like, I actually prefer the multiplayer in The Last of Us to games like Gears of War and stuff like that. When I just bought the game for the single player, I really wasn't expecting much, but it's by no means a tacked-on feature.
It's kind of like Gears of War, just with limited ammo, more visceral combat. Everyone's not a bullet sponge, and emphasizes cooperative play, where Gears of War threw that out the window with Judgment.
Yeah, exactly.
The game reminded me of the old Splinter Cell. I think it was Splinter Cell 2, where mercenaries and spies and multiplayer. That was pretty good gameplay.
VerticalSprite, what do you think? Did you play The Last of Us?
I didn't play The Last of Us. I have seen some videos on YouTube about it, but I think any multiplayer game where you have to use your brains more than your trigger finger, where you can rely more on tactics than just the ping time, is better in my book. I've played Gears of War Judgment myself, and I didn't like it because everything seems to come around to the Call of Duty type of thinking, level up, get perks, get this, get that. And for me, I want something where I can actually plan my next move, if that makes sense.
Yeah, Judgment was terrible. I mean, they took out like resing and things. I mean, there was no reason to play with the team. And we'll just do a vote on this one. Number 4, Trent, which one? Bioshock or The Last of Us?
Bioshock.
The Last of Us.
Val?
I'm gonna go with The Last of Us.
Andrew?
The Last of Us.
VerticalSprite.
I will have to go with Bioshock Infinite, I'm afraid.
And I'm voting Last of Us. So we'll put Last of Us at number 4 and Bioshock at number 5. Yeah, they had pretty similar strengths and weaknesses. Alright, number 6. We got a few more, looks like Tomb Raider, Grand Theft Auto. Any other games anyone wants to throw in there for number 6?
Brothers: A Tale of Two Sons would be my number 6.
Oh, I'll second that.
Alright. Why is Brothers better than Tomb Raider or Grand Theft Auto?
Well, it's a unique game, something that's really never been done before. It has a great narrative, even though the characters just talk in gibberish. You always know what they're trying to say. The puzzles are a little easy, but they're definitely fun. The art style is amazing. Areas are varied, and it actually has probably one of the most emotional stories of the year, aside from The Last of Us.
What do you like about a vertical?
I was actually going to say exactly the same thing, pretty much exactly the same thing. There's not many games that have an impact where you finish the game, you get the achievement for completing it, and you put it down. But with that game, it does stay with you because it's not a good story. It's quite tragic at the end, without going into spoilers. And it does tell a story, and it's not a very happy story. Playing it from start to finish. It's all about teamwork, and playing it on a single pad, the amount of new mechanics that it brings into play, it never stays on one puzzle for too long. You'll play something, you'll do a section, and before you know it, you're going to another area. It's something totally new. It never gets stale at all.
Yeah, unfortunately, I only got a chance to kind of dabble with it just for a little while before we started this discussion. But I do have to say that I really enjoyed the control scheme, because they could have done the game in such a way that you swap between characters, almost Grand Theft Auto style, by pausing the game and then swapping over. To me, that gets really tedious, and it takes a couple minutes to adjust, and it's really easy to kind of use both characters simultaneously. It keeps a nice, brisk pace to the puzzle solving, and I really definitely appreciated that, and I'm looking forward to going back and finishing it.
Yeah, the pacing is just phenomenal, and the control scheme is really unique. It's something that's really hasn't been done before.
Anyone want to argue GTA 5 or Tomb Raider for going above Brothers? I mean, I didn't play it, so I can't really comment on it. GTA 5 was a bit of a disappointment. Tomb Raider was great, but
well, let's discuss pros and cons of Tomb Raider and GTA 5 just to have those on the table. Talking about Tomb Raider, Grand Theft Auto, and comparing it to Brothers, it's apples and oranges in terms of what those games are trying to accomplish and why they are as esteemed as they are.
Oh, GTA 5, I'll start with that one. Single player was pretty strong. It had a problem with currency. You can obtain everything in the game. The story was a bit fast and loose at the beginning, and then it got a little bit more focused at the end. The multiplayer was a disaster on launch, and that's the main reason I bought it. So I was pretty disappointed by it. And even well into launch, at this point, it's still a complete disaster. I mean, it became essentially a pretty fun racing game that you could dick around and screw with people online, but they penalize you for having fun in the game by putting penalties on killing other players, or you could have passive mode. They had things that were just completely counterintuitive to a Grand Theft Auto game. And then they reduced how much money you can make by doing everything in the game, and they're pretty much forcing people into microtransactions, and they're not penalizing people for hacking and abusing the system and unlocking everything that way. So the multiplayer, the reason I bought it, was a complete disaster. The single player was pretty strong. Los Santos was an amazing world.
Yeah, I mean, as far as the narrative, because I was actually looking forward to the single player. I really enjoy the writing of the guys at Rockstar. I really enjoy their sense of satire. And I have to say I was kind of disappointed, actually, because they touted having 3 characters and being able to swap between them and all. But I found that I definitely got the sense from a writing standpoint that the focus was on Michael. And I didn't mind Michael, I didn't have a problem with him. But when we go to switch to Trevor or Franklin, they felt a little bit undercooked compared to Michael. Franklin, for instance, was almost the most relatable character in the sense that, he's just waiting to make some money, and he's wondering why the hell these stupid ass white people can't get their shit together and actually make money. They just end up losing it all the time, and they're playing high stakes games. And then Trevor is just a complete psychopath, so he's kind of fun to play as, and it's fun to see what goes on around him. But he's not engaging in the way that a normal Grand Theft Auto character is, in my book. So I was just really let down by that. And also the mission design in terms of incorporating having 3 characters you could swap between. I never felt that it actually really took advantage of that. I mean, there were a couple missions, of course, most notably the one where you're actually counter-sniping on a skyscraper across the way from another skyscraper where there are targets, things like that. But I mean, it's only a couple missions where you really have to get your 3 characters to cooperate and, hot swap between them to work together. So it was just really disappointing to me on that front.
Yeah, they missed that opportunity a bit, and Franklin was pretty much a throwaway character because, I mean, he's like a character from older Grand Theft Auto games. People are like, oh, we're going to go do this. And he's like, I don't want to do that, and then he goes and does it anyway. Like, every single mission, he's like, I don't want to do that. That's stupid. You'd have to be a complete moron to do that, but yeah, let's go do it. Like, that's every single mission he does. Like, he's a multi-millionaire, and then he goes back down in the ghetto and, like, tows trucks and stuff. Like, it's just stupid. Trevor I liked more than Michael, but it was based around Michael, the story.
Well, the other thing, too, with Franklin, the love of his life, who'd run off with someone else, and, hit it at that, and then, later in the game, she comes in and shows up at your place to tell you to rescue your buddy, and it's just we forgot about these characters. I played for, 15 or 20 hours, and where were these characters? And now you're just going to bring them up just because you want to force a conclusion. It's really poor.
No, that's that's what Franklin's thinking, to put you in his shoes. He's just like, where the hell have you been? I'm up here living the good life. And that and the whole end was terrible. I mean, we're going to have spoilers in this conversation if we're talking about story, but we already did with Bioshock. But I mean, the whole end was terrible. The whole fact that they're blackmailing him throughout the entire game when they're psychopathic murderers, at the end you resolve the entire issue by going, why don't we just kill everyone blackmailing us and giving us all this trouble? And then they just do that and solve all their problems. And I was thinking that the entire time I'm playing this game. I'm like, I kill thousands of people in this game. Why don't I just kill the people that are forcing me to do all this shit for no money?
Yeah, pretty much. The overall story, especially the ending, was pretty weak. I thought the characters were all interesting, except for maybe Franklin. He was just kind of plain. I thought the whole character swapping was just kind of a gimmick. The game probably would have just benefited from either just having Michael as a main character or just Trevor, and that's it. And like Josh mentioned earlier, the multiplayer was a major disappointment. All sorts of promised features that were initially supposed to be in the game weren't included. And the fact that it's a Grand Theft Auto game and you can't even steal someone's car online just seems, pretty terrible to me.
Yeah, they can make it so no one can get in their car, and that's a genius idea to put that in there. That makes the game a lot of fun.
I kind of enjoyed the swappable characters on some of the missions. Granted, yes, it was limited throughout the game, but those moments that you could actually swap from a helicopter and then all of a sudden down to the ground was something memorable to me because, I mean, these heists were rather fun and designed well, but again, why did they not have them in multiplayer is beyond me.
I do wonder whether or not it would have been an option to include the 3 characters as 3 separate campaigns from the start, where you could play as each character in turn, because for me, Red Dead Redemption told one of the best stories, but it was only because it was a focused story.
Yeah, I mean, that's my kind of problem is you have these 3 characters, and like I said, there's definitely from a writing standpoint a focus on one of them, and the other 2 are these kind of peripheral distractions. And I do agree, and Red Dead Redemption is one of the reasons I was really looking forward to playing Grand Theft Auto 5, because that, to me, was a fantastic game, a fantastic narrative, and this just kind of forgot all the lessons that Red Dead Redemption taught us, I think.
Val, do you have anything to say about it?
I think I wasn't as enthusiastic about Grand Theft Auto 5 as all you guys. So when I started playing the campaign, I took my time and, I enjoyed it. I really didn't see the swapping as a gimmick. I played the game as it was, and the multiplayer, from when I started playing, I never had an issue with it. I think at one point I did lose $20,000, but other than that, I enjoyed it, and I had a lot of fun with you guys playing it.
The online gameplay was fun if you had a good crew to play with. I mean, even when we were roaming the streets, just dicking around with people, I mean, that was really enjoyable.
Yeah, but it was like it's 99% of us playing it was racing though. It was just like a racing game to it. Like digging around the streets was fun, but there's like no incentive to do it. You can't. It takes longer to level up, and people can turn on passive mode, and no one can attack them. No one can get in their car. And the fact you can just turn that on if you want to at any time, and if you die in it, you just spawn 20 feet away from where you died. Like there's no penalty for anything, and there's no consequence. It takes away all fun. I'm just like, oh, I kill a guy, and then he spawns 20 feet behind me and shoots me in the back. Like, who gives a shit?
Okay, well, there's more of a penalty actually to like roaming around the streets because I mean, as we kind of mentioned, microtransactions were a big thing in that game. Money was all you played for. You wanted to buy houses, you wanted to buy cars, you wanted to buy new weapons, etc. And when you're roaming the streets, you're putting your finances on the line because every time you die, you lose a couple grand, even if you don't have anything in your pocket. So if you end up in the scenario that Josh mentioned, where you kill a guy, he spawns behind you and shoots you, and then you're spawning basically 50 yards away from each other all the time with a giant grudge, you might find yourself like at the end of your little grudge match with that guy, like broke. I mean, and then you can't buy bullets and you can't buy flak jackets. Forget about buying a new apartment. It's just so that's why we spend all the time racing because there's a liability basically to kind of screw around in the way that you would expect to screw around in an online Grand Theft Auto experience.
What I was gonna say is, when I was gonna buy Grand Theft Auto 5, my focus was gonna be on the single player. And to me, the multiplayer was just going to be something I'd do with you guys. I enjoyed the single player. I hadn't played a Grand Theft Auto game since San Andreas, and I didn't even beat that because I didn't like it. I think the last one I really liked was Vice City. And to me, Michael was the most interesting character because he was the link between Franklin and Trevor. And his family was just out of control. And yeah, he definitely was my favorite character of the three.
Yeah, the Jonah Hill son. Since we never had our GTA 5 discussion, when people still believe this and people are still pushing this and big review sites and stuff talked about this, is there any validity in the statement that you shouldn't be upset with Grand Theft Auto's multiplayer because it shouldn't be counted as part of GTA 5? It's something they added on. You should be grateful for it. It's a completely different thing. It's a whole new game. Is there any validity in that statement that anyone would agree with?
No,
not at all.
It's on the disc. It's on the disc. I mean, I understand the case they're making in the sense that there's a lot of content in the game. And I don't think under any circumstance you could argue that you're not going to get $60 worth out of Grand Theft Auto 5. But if it's on the disc, it's a critiquable feature. It's worth picking apart and being upset about.
It's also a reason that some people bought the game, which people seem to forget.
It was a huge portion of their advertising. They announced Grand Theft Auto Online like 6 months before the game came out.
It was a while. And then they had a really good trailer with a bunch of stuff that they didn't put in the game. Anyone want to make an argument for the fact that it's a separate game so I can destroy you right now?
I think, as far as I'm concerned, if the game was released on a separate disc or even as a separate game altogether, then fair enough. But you've got to ask yourself, if this was being developed alongside the main game itself, the main single-player game, how many resources were committed to it? Because at the end of the day, when it was released, when the servers went live, you still couldn't get on for several weeks. And did the multiplayer impact the single player in any way, shape or form? Personally, I got GTA 5 for the single player, but was that harmed by the multiplayer aspect of it?
Yeah, you could actually corrupt your single player data and make it, if you went online and went back over and changed character and it didn't save properly, you can make it so you couldn't change characters ever again or buy weapons and stuff. You could actually completely corrupt your single player file from the multiplayer for a while if you saved after you did that.
What I know in terms of resources, I don't remember the figures, but they're talking about how it's the most expensive game that's been made so far, and apparently it's had like the largest team. I think over 1,000 people or something worked on Grand Theft Auto 5. I mean, I feel like the manpower had to be there. I don't see how it couldn't have been, given the fact that a lot of resources from the single player transferred over to the multiplayer. I mean, there weren't any extra areas you could get to online that you couldn't get to in the single player. So I don't know. I just think they really dropped the ball personally.
No, it's all the same stuff you can do in single player. I mean, it's the same city, the same cars, the same everything. Like, I don't see how you can argue it was something different when most games add new content for multiplayer. It just kind of put extra game modes you can do with friends on there. But it was the same assets. You're using the exact same stuff.
don't think it was the most expensive game in terms of budget. Like, I think it was the fastest selling, but I think the most expensive game was Star Wars: The Old Republic, in terms of like how much they spent on a game.
I don't know. I just
Either
think-
way, though,
I
they
just-
should have had the manpower.
Well, let's talk about Tomb Raider. I started GTA.
I'll talk about
Well,
Tomb Raider since I just recently played it.
There we go, Trent.
So Tomb Raider kind of caught me by surprise because, frankly, I was interested in playing it. When I saw it was announced, because it looked pretty appealing. But at the same time, in the back of my head, I knew that Tomb Raider has struggled a bit lately. Tomb Raider Legends was a really good kind of revitalized the franchise, but since then it kind of waned, kind of faltered a bit. But I was really surprised playing the Tomb Raider reboot. I really thought that it was a good origin story. I really thought it built up this new kind of take on Lara Croft in a way that's going to be interesting going forward. It really kind of gives you some insight into why she's such a hard ass. In terms of gameplay, what I was really most worried about is puzzles. Everyone here knows I'm a huge puzzle whore, and it kind of sickens me that we've gotten away from puzzles in games, because I think they're extremely important in terms of pace. I have to say I was glad to see that puzzles weren't cut altogether from Tomb Raider, but I will say that I was a little bit disappointed in terms of how easy they were. They're all physics-based. I expected the tombs to be a little lengthier. I expected there to be, a few kind of hurdles and traps and things to overcome, except each one was a single puzzle before you get your reward, and then you head back out. But overall, I really enjoyed the game. In fact, personally, to me, it was better than Uncharted, since that I like the combat a lot more. I like the fact that enemies weren't bullet sponges like they are in Uncharted. Combat is generally pretty brief. There were a few extended sections which were kind of annoying. I mean, overall, I was really impressed. I really thought it was a really strong way to reboot that franchise.
And the reviewer of the game?
Yeah, I enjoyed Tomb Raider, obviously, and I really like the pacing of the game. I like the environments, the sheer amount of areas to explore, the amount of unlockables, the general gameplay were all great. I did find the combat to be a bit too easy. Like, even if you play it on the hard difficulty, it really doesn't offer much of a challenge, and the overall narrative was kind of the weak point for me. But in terms of gameplay elements, it was great.
I think personally, when you was talking about the Tombs side of it, yeah, the puzzles were a bit light. I can totally agree with that, because if you've played any of the previous Tomb Raider games, they were a lot more unforgiving. As far as the storytelling goes, I think Batman Arkham Asylum has had a lot to do with the way that stories are told in games nowadays, because there seems to be a lot of traits now with backtracking and the way that missions are constructed.
I don't think Batman would have affected that, though. I think a lot of games have done that for a while.
Resident Evil is really what
Yeah.
comes to mind in terms of backtracking and looping around on yourself.
Finding files and things to flesh out the story. It's got a good lead on Batman.
Tomb Raider felt like a lot of other
I
games
can see that.
combined when I played it. Like, it actually, even though it's not a horror game, it really reminded me of Resident Evil 4 in terms of the third-person shooting mechanics, the gameplay, the backtracking, the amount of like extra areas to explore, find hidden secrets and stuff. That all sort of felt like Resident Evil 4 to me. The overall premise of it was similar to Uncharted. Kind of had like a bit of Assassin's Creed platforming built in as well. Just felt like a hybrid of multiple games to me.
Yeah, the aesthetic kind of reminded me of Resident Evil 4 a bit. Like the parts where it was like dark and there was only like torches lighting up the spot, that reminded me a lot of.
Colors really washed out, kind of like Resident Evil 4, so I get.
Yeah, the as far as comparing it to Uncharted, which is the most directly similar game to it, I mean, I still like the Uncharted games better than Tomb Raider. Tomb Raider had better gameplay and combat. The Uncharted games have kind of that Indiana Jones humor behind it. They're a lot more expansive and epic. You go all around the world and visit all these cool set pieces and locations, where that one was centralized on an island. I kind of wanted to go somewhere else by the end of it.
That's kind of what I liked. I like that cohesiveness of, you're trapped on this island, you have to get off, and you get to explore a multitude of areas on that same island. I feel like from a design standpoint, sometimes it's kind of lazy to be able to say, okay, we're going to find a way for our story to take us over here because we've got this really great idea. I feel like Naughty Dog sometimes sits down and they decide, okay, we're going to make a new Uncharted game, let's design set pieces, and then let's kind of devise a narrative that strings together all these set pieces. Because the narrative for Uncharted is character-driven. Nathan Drake is a really fun character. He's got his little love triangle. He's got Sully, who's a fun character. So they don't need an interesting series of events because they have great characters that will ensure that the experience is entertaining.
I like the fact that it has a sense of humor. You know, Laura Croft, I get annoyed a few reasons. I hated that movie Grab. But, you know, I kind of get annoyed of hearing people breathe and grunt all the time. That just kind of gets to me after playing 8 hours. Just like, for 8 hours, it's like I've heard enough of that.
I'm guessing you're not a fan of women's tennis.
No, I can't say I am. I'm not a fan of men's tennis either. No. Anyone else got anything to say on Tomb Raider? All right. So, what do we put as number 6?
Here's what I think. Personally, I'd like to have Brothers at number 6, Tomb Raider at number 7, and Grand Theft Auto at number 8.
Because, I mean, if you listen to the conversation, those who played Brothers really didn't have anything bad to say about it. And we had our issues and nitpicks and frustrations with the other 2 games.
I'm okay with that.
Sounds good.
All right. Brother, Tomb Raider, and GTA 5. So for 9 and 10, I'm going to pick games we kind of skipped over people have high on their list. We've got Gone Home for Trent. Injustice is mentioned on 2 lists. Splinter Cell, yeah, we got that on a few lists, actually. Dead Space 3, anyone want to make an argument for Dead Space 3?
It did actually take me by surprise, to be honest.
Yeah, it took me by surprise, too. It's like dropping the soap in a shower surprise.
It wasn't actually a bad game, and the co-op element of it did surprise me, but man, did they drop the ball on the ending, because as a game itself, you finished it off and still went, what? You know, unless you buy the DLC, there's no conclusive ending to it.
That and it's 15 hours too long, and they recycle half the assets in the game, and you keep playing the same area over and over and over and over and over and over again. And the microtransaction bullshit.
I was going to say, it's a game I would have liked a lot more if they called it something other than Dead Space. Because I do agree with VerticalSprite in terms of, I like some of the co-op aspects of it. I like the fact they had specific areas, you know, that are co-op only. Because I think one of the shortcomings in a lot of co-op games now is that the game is designed as a single-player experience, and they turn around and say, okay, let's make co-op. Okay, what we're going to do is 2 people can play the same thing together, and we'll add more enemies. And I think that kind of undermines, you know, the appeal of co-op.
I'll say this. First of all, Nathan and I played through a co-op, and the co-op areas, you weren't missing much. They just reused the same areas over and over and over again, and they were single-player areas that they made it so you had to press 2 switches instead of 1 switch. Like, it was complete recycled trash.
I'll just say B for effort, then. I don't know. I just want to give it...
No, it's bullshit. It's something they could just add on there, and it's like, okay, this is the same area we did, like... We were in a spaceship, we did this. Now we're on this planet, and it's the same exact area. That's weird. They changed a few boxes around.
Like the same exact room, something like 17 times, and that same room was like on spaceships, it was on the planet, and they would just like change it around a little bit. Like there'd be like a bit of blood on the walls, but it's like the same identical room in different areas. Like they just reused everything. It's like playing Dragon Age 2, pretty much. That's what Dead Space 3 is. It's Dragon Age 2.
Okay, so we've got Gone Home, Splinter Cell, Injustice, Battlefield 4. Any other games? DMC.
DMC is my number 9.
Okay, Gone Home.
Alright, since I'm the only one here that apparently likes this game, here's my deal with Gone Home, and here's why it stands out to me. First of all, it's not so much about... It's about its structure, and it's about what it attempts to do. And I think that gaming really needs to look at games like Gone Home, like Metro, like Bioshock, and sit down and look at ways in which we present the story so that it's interactive and it's engaging. And I really like the fact that Gone Home starts, you don't know what's going on, you're like, okay, I'm showing up to my house after I've been in Europe for so long, no one's here, this is weird, it's stormy outside, my family's just moved to this home, you know, somewhat recently, figure out what's going on. And I like the fact that basically, I didn't feel like the game, like, constrains you to a really tiny area. I feel like you have a reasonable sized chunk of real estate to roam around in, find documents, find little clues as to, you know, what's been happening with your family over this year that you've been away from them. I really like the fact, too, that it takes place in the 90s, and that really kind of has a huge influence on its design. It's in terms of, you know, what you see in the house. It has an impact in terms of you can't keep in contact with your family by a cell phone. You really have to put things together. And I like the way that there's always a sense of logic behind each and every document that you picked up. I never found documents or found materials where I'm just like, wait, well, what the hell is this supposed to mean? What does this pertain to? You know, it all made sense. And each one of those documents felt organic and felt real and felt like it wasn't put there directly to be expository, you know, to directly tell you the sequence of events that led up to this point was. It was about, here's this little bit of information, take it and do what you will with it. And you find other documents that kind of build a narrative around each one of the characters that lives in the home. I just thought it was fantastic.
I appreciated what it attempted to do. I just didn't find it at all interesting. I thought it was actually linear. I mean, I went over, did anyone else? I went to the left side of the house. You pretty much have two choices, go to the left side of the house or go upstairs. You go through both of those, then you find the secret pathway, you go down there and it guides you through the basement or the right side of the house, and then you go to the attic. I mean, it's...
I'm not making the case that it isn't linear. What I'm saying is it's not like it says, okay, you go from the front porch, you went into the foyer, and then from the foyer, you find the key to the office, and from the office, you get a key to the library. I mean, you have several rooms to kind of wander around in. And what I'm saying is basically that despite having these several rooms, you could go into those rooms in any order, and you pick up documents, you find clues as to who your family is and what's been going on with them, and it all still makes sense, regardless of which room you choose to tackle first. It's not like the whole house is open to you, and you can go anywhere at any time. I'm just saying that it at least creates the illusion in my mind that I have some choice as to where I go and what I do, yet it still makes sense.
As soon as I read a few of the notes, I felt like I had a good idea what her family was about. Her sister's secret or whatever is pretty prevalent at the beginning. Her dad has some developments, and I don't know, her mom. I mean, it's very limited on what happens from the first letters to the last letters.
I'll admit, at the start of the game, I was definitely interested. It seemed like a mystery. It was kind of creepy and eerie. It's just a big empty house. You learn about sort of the backstory of the house. There's all these elements that, something sinister might be going on in the background. And it just raised my expectations. I was just expecting something more to happen. And for me, it was just completely anticlimactic once I figured out what was going on.
I think part of the beauty for me, though, is the game is it goes against what we expect video games to be, because it does kind of tease you with like a supernatural element which never materializes. And I like that. I like that it betrayed my expectations. Because, for a while there, it's like, oh, look, Ouija boards, and, there's these candles, and it looks like there's been a seance here, and this place is called the Psycho House. I like the fact that it kind of teased you with those elements, but it turned out to be a much more intimate and human story rather than going off into the supernatural or something more fanciful. I like that it was a little more grounded. I made this comparison in my review. It kind of reminds me a bit of a movie like American Beauty, where you have kind of a cheerful family facade, but underneath there's some really dark and really kind of upsetting things that are occurring underneath an otherwise pristine surface.
I don't feel like I learned that much more throughout the game. It went from shy lesbian to confident lesbian, and from struggling molested writer to somewhat successful writer, to thinking about cheating with her husband to deciding not to cheat with her husband and try and get the relationship fixed. Like, that's 2 hours. That's what happened.
But you're also sitting here and thinking this in terms of each individual character on their own separate arc. Look at the interplay between the characters as a result of what they're going through in their individual lives. And I think to me, that's, I guess, what was kind of interesting, is you have characters who they have their own separate challenges, their own separate heartaches, their own separate issues, their own problems. And I thought it was interesting to see how each character's, what they're going through affects the characters around them. I thought it was interesting, for instance, you find a book with a note on it that's about how to make friends as a teenager. And there's a note on it saying, maybe this will help Sam out or whatever. So the fact that this girl who's struggling with her sexual orientation seems to be a loner, an outcast, to her family, and they think, oh, well, she just needs friends. It's interesting to me to see how these people all live in the same house, and they seem to know so little about one another. To me, that's really fascinating and really, really true, and kind of hits home, because I think that's every family. I think, we all individually have our own little things that we deal with, and other people that we live with kind of see the results of some of our own struggles, but they don't know exactly what it is that, what's really going on with us. I think that's pretty fascinating.
So the moral of the game was, if you want to know your family better, get a smaller house.
Sure.
I don't know. There's just a lot of stupid things that didn't make sense. Like the second floor. That bothered me. I didn't like how the second floor just didn't have anything underneath it. I didn't like that. There's just like lots of little analytical things because they inherited the house. Judging by the letters you read and stuff, you assume it's much larger than the house they came from. Yet somehow, after being in the house for several months to a year, there was letters in 1994. They still haven't unpacked boxes everywhere. It's little things like that. I'm just like, how big was the house they came from now that they can't fit all their stuff in this new house, that they have to have a huge basement full of boxes and boxes in every closet and boxes everywhere. Why are all the electronics unplugged? I didn't understand that. There's just like little things that just kept taking me out of it.
Well, I can tell you why the electronics were unplugged. It's possible that Sam has basically stolen all those to pawn them so that she could basically use that money on the road to run away. I mean, she leaves a note. There's a note you find with Sam that says something about sorry about the missing things or something along those lines. So it's kind of hinted that she took all that stuff. And see, that's the other thing. Like, it's a game that I enjoy the fact that it requires you to pay attention. It requires you to really kind of focus and poke your nose around. There are small things in that game I thought were just fantastic. You'll notice if you go in the parents' bedroom, there's a Bible like inside of the kind of the nightstand drawer. Near where the mom sleeps. And then if you go into Sam's room, you find a Bible that's like in the closet. And it's kind of telling about those characters because what it tells me is the mom, at least at some level, seems to be a bit more religious or a bit more conscious of religion than the daughter. I mean, it's little details like that develop and tell about characters. And I think that's fascinating. I think that is something that video games should really try to capitalize in terms of how they tell their stories, because you have an interactive space to deal with. You don't have to be expository. You don't have to be so explicit in what you tell about characters, because you can allow players to find details about characters. And to me, that's just, it's an achievement that is absolutely unmatched this year by any other game in terms of narrative.
I've played a little bit of Gone Home, and to be honest, I have to agree with you, because if you're reading a piece of paper, or if it's just something that you pick up and it's a predetermined thing in a linear story, then there's no connecting of the dots. I think it's a lot more rewarding if you can pick up two random objects and make the connection yourself.
Yeah, I think that's nice. I just don't think it did it very well.
I'll admit that the method of storytelling in Gone Home was impressive and unique. It's something that's not really done, and I'd like to see that expanded upon in the future. But the overall story itself, I didn't care for. I thought it was just anticlimactic and not all that interesting for me.
I started the game like picking up every single thing and looking at it, and then I realized all I really have to do is look for the notes and look for the things that are kind of different. I was looking at cans, I was looking at every little thing, and after I looked at like 3 sets of identical coupons, I just kind of got tired of doing that, and I just started looking for notes.
Well, yeah, like any game, there are assets that are repeated, and you recognize those. I also like the fact that it does allow you to interact with a bunch of things that really have nothing to do with telling you the story. I felt that makes it a much more real and immersive environment. Just for instance, if you have a game like The Walking Dead, where basically the only things you can interact with are the things that progress you, or allow you to progress in the game. Like, to me, I like having something that makes the environment that I'm in more real. And I think a game like, let's say The Walking Dead would benefit from giving you red herrings or giving you things that, you could examine that don't necessarily move the plot along, but just kind of make the space that you're in more tangible and more real. And I think Gone Home does a fantastic job of that. And yeah, if you want to pick up every stapler and see the fact that, it's all the same stapler, more power to you. But I think a savvy gamer will notice after 3 or 4 coffee cups they pick up that are exactly the same, that, it's going to be a repeated asset.
You talk about the subtleties and how the narrative is developed, and you look at games like a perfect example of that would be Dark Souls, and how it developed its story and all the characters you meet along the way. They don't say a lot about themselves, but as you go along, you figure out who they are. I mean, I think that's kind of what Gone Home seems to be doing.
Dark Souls has a much stronger narrative than Gone Home. There's no comparison.
I'd have to disagree. There's no emotional weight to Dark Souls.
I didn't think there was a whole lot there. To me, it just seemed these characters were way too one-dimensional. It was all about... There were little things like the Bible and stuff, but every letter you read, like Sam's letter was, they're all about lying. It didn't really flesh her out as a character more than someone who's coming to terms with she's a lesbian, which, it's like you knew it before she knew it in the letter.
I'll admit that The Walking Dead would definitely benefit from some of the methods employed in Gone Home in terms of interacting with all the objects in the environment more. But just comparing the stories side by side, The Walking Dead is much better. and the characters are much more developed and a lot more interesting in The Walking Dead as well.
I'd love to see something like this done with something more interesting, with more of an art.
That's a bit subjective. More interesting. That doesn't really mean much to anyone else. I mean, the story either resonates with you or it doesn't. You can either kind of find something that you relate to in it, or you can't. I mean, it's definitely a very polarizing game, and I think any kind of reviews you look at kind of hinted that people either really connect with it or they don't. And I guess I'm the only one here that connects with it so far.
Okay, Splinter Cell.
I really enjoyed Splinter Cell. I was actually really surprised by it. I expected it to be complete and total trash, I'm not going to lie. But I found that it actually has a really strong multiplayer component. It has a really strong cooperative component, and it has, a pretty solid single-player campaign. Kind of what I was talking about with Dead Space, I appreciated the fact that Splinter Cell actually has its own separate set of missions for co-op. And some of them are a bit underwhelming. The horde mode style missions are kind of dumb, but missions that are specifically tailored to having two people working together, I think is a really great feature, and I think it's something that more games should look at. My biggest problem, though, with Splinter Cell was probably would have to do with the narrative, and I hated how gutless it was. It touches on a lot of controversial aspects of modern geopolitical current events. It touches kind of on American imperialism, the fact that we have military installations all over the world, but it doesn't really offer any commentary on them. Take a visit to Guantanamo Bay, doesn't offer any commentary on Guantanamo. And it's not that I want Splinter Cell to become a heavy-handed Metal Gear Solid style critique of all these things. I just wish that the characters would have acknowledged they're involved in some things that are kind of shady, but perhaps they're like, well, power is far greater than ourselves are at work here, and we have a mission to take care of, and, we kind of have to put our immediate goals in front of more grandiose ideological concerns.
Splinter Cell was good. It wasn't as good as the Pandora Tomorrow and Chaos series, but I think it's the best one they've made in a while. My biggest problem with it was it was far too easy. You could play on the hardest difficulty and rush through the game in 8 hours and get Silent Assassin. Or not Silent Assassin, whatever Splinter Cell equivalent to that. Ghost, yeah. I mean, I went through the game on the hardest difficulty and just breezed through it. Usually Splinter Cell games are pretty difficult on those difficulties. The co-op was fun. I played that with Val a bit, and multiplayer's a lot of fun. I just didn't think it was as good as two of the older ones. It's a bit of a return to form, though.
I spent most of my time playing with Josh on the multiplayer. The Spies versus Mercenaries was a lot of fun. I never played it on the older games. And it did get tense. It was scary to know that there's these spies lurking around. And then you just see them jump out at you. Makes you jump. Thought the co-op was well done. Playing with Josh, I could see he would just maneuver throughout the environments much better than I did. But as I played on my own, I was able to do it as well. I really enjoyed it, but I never finished the campaign since I was focused on other games at the time.
And I like it. It was on my top 10 list. Injustice. I made a couple lists.
It was for me. It was a beat 'em up that came out of the blue, to be honest. I mean, DC relaunched the New 52 comics and all the rest of it, but we're not going to go into nerd territory here. But it was a beat 'em up with a totally different set of mechanics to what you're used to, with multiple stages, and it was more in common with Mortal Kombat than any other beat 'em up, to be honest. And it was very, very brutal, more brutal than any DC game had any right to be fair. Even with finishing moves, but they weren't finishing moves, it was more like super moves. But I just found the combo system very, very solid. The online system was solid as well, and there was a fair selection of characters. It wasn't cynical. By that I mean that you didn't have to pay for a ton of extra characters. There was just a season pass with a few extra characters if you wanted, but you buy the disc, you play. It was just a solid fighter.
Yeah, I liked it. It didn't make my top 10, but I like the Mortal Kombat reboot a little bit better. I felt it was light on levels. The levels kind of came into play in those games. You could use them to do stuff. It had, maybe a dozen levels. Good character selection. The finishing moves were good. The fact you could interact with the levels was a nice addition to the game. I thought the campaign was kind of weak.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think it's the best fighting game of the year. I agree with the lack of stages. The fact that the campaign was a little short. It was definitely a solid game, but it didn't quite make my list. And comparing it to Mortal Kombat, I thought it was a step down. even though that came out a couple years ago.
I wouldn't call it a step down from Mortal Kombat. A lateral step, I would agree. I don't know. Again, it's another game kind of like Bioshock in the sense that it does kind of stand in the shadow of Mortal Kombat because, they took the core of Mortal Kombat. We said, okay, we've got all these, superheroes and villains. So, what can we do to differentiate this game from Mortal Kombat? And the biggest difference, obviously, was with the stages. A storyline difference as well, of course, being able to interweave all of these characters and, how they relate to one another. I found the story kind of kitschy. I guess maybe because I'm a giant comic book nerd. I know who these characters are. I know what their role is in their universe they occupy. I don't know. It was just kind of a silly, fun narrative to kind of a reason for all these characters to be together. I was kind of glad to see that Superman was a dick because I always think he's a bit of a dick. I think he should be a dick more often.
I do have to agree with Trent about the lateral step because they're not actually changing that much, but they are trying new things like with the stages and that. And I know that the tag team functions of Mortal Kombat aren't there, but they do seem to be trying different things. And for me, it worked, but I can understand why if other people have reservations.
Val, you played it. Andrew played it.
No, I didn't.
Val played it.
Yeah, I played it quite a bit. I enjoyed the campaign. It wasn't as good as Mortal Kombat's, but the combat was a lot of fun, and I kept going back to it every few months. I really liked that how you, Josh, were talking about you were able to interact with the environments. I like how certain characters were able to interact with them differently.
Yeah, the superpowered ones could lift things. The Joker, the weaker ones could just move. They could react with them differently. What about DMC? I thought it was a great Devil May Cry game. I liked it better than the fourth one. Decent reboot. The combat in it wasn't as good as and developed as some of the older ones, but I thought it's They Live styled story where Mundus is using subjective reasoning and influence on everybody. That was pretty interesting, and I thought the terrains and the worlds were really well crafted and beautiful. How everything kept changing whenever you went to a new location. Boss battles were fun.
Yeah, I thought Devil May Cry was a great reboot. I know one of the major complaints people have is the way Dante looks. Personally, I don't care about that. I really enjoyed the art direction, the variety of the different stages, the exploration. My main problems with it, though, were the fact that the combat was a bit too easy. There was no lock-on. It didn't really feel challenging like the other Devil May Cry games. I really didn't care for the music.
Yeah, it was a cakewalk compared to the other Devil May Cry games. Complete joke.
Yeah, the hardest difficulty is fun to play on, but it sucks you have to go through the game 3 times to get even on the unlockable hell difficulty, or what was the 4th difficulty? I went through the game twice.
They had just Dante Must Die, Heaven and Hell, and then Hell and Hell, I think. Something like that.
There was like an Inferno or something between that and Hard. I played the one after Hard, whatever that was, and that felt like what the default difficulty should have played, because the first time through I never even died, which in Devil May Cry you should die every now and then your first time through.
It was Nephilim, then Son of Sparta, then Dante Must Die, and then the other ones I mentioned. I think Son of Sparta difficulty is the one you're thinking of.
Yeah, might have been that. That felt like it should have been the normal difficulty.
Yeah, that felt like the same
Not too
difficulty as like Devil May Cry 3 on normal Son of Sparta mode.
DMC was definitely a solid reboot, but it just didn't really quite move me in the way that some of the other games that we've mentioned did. I'm more interested to see what they do next. I think this is a nice, solid start.
Anyone else who played it?
It was a different take on the Devil May Cry series. I really liked the reboot, and it had those crazy boss fights. What was that one that you really enjoyed, Josh?
Bob something.
Barbas.
Bob Barbas, yeah. Yeah, that was a fun fight. It was easy as shit, but it was fun.
I mean, I enjoyed the game, and it definitely had some of the best art direction of the year. I would put it in my top 10. Personally, would like to see that at number 9.
Yeah, it's in my top 10 too. It's in 3 people's top 10. Okay, Battlefield 4. What?
I was going to ask if VerticalSprite played DMC.
No, I haven't played DMC. I know it's on sale at Steam at the moment, but no, I haven't. And I haven't played Battlefield 4 either. Sorry.
If I was recommending to get a DMC, if you haven't played 1 or 3, I'd get those before DMC. They're
Okay,
old, but
mate,
they're
no
still
problem.
fun. Battlefield 4. Val and Andrew love the shit out of that game, so you guys talk about it.
Well, I think it's just more for gameplay, fun factor. The game's been patched, I think, twice, I believe. I don't know. On the Xbox One. And it still has bugs in it. Game crashes on several maps. I know for me, personally, it's Metro most of the time.
I mean, the campaign wasn't really any. It was a nice
No, the
tech demo.
campaign is, yeah, it's just great visuals, big deal. But, I mean, Battlefield was mainly for the multiplayer.
Yeah, when I pick a Battlefield, I pick it up for the multiplayer. And since I've never really liked Battlefield on PC, I mean, I tried Battlefield 3 on PC and the 64 player thing, and I mean, I enjoy it, but it just doesn't feel the same when I'm holding a keyboard compared to a controller for some reason. But I mean, the 64 players online on the Xbox is amazing. I keep wanting to go back to it.
Yeah, it's the true experience. I like Battlefield games a lot. For some reason, I'm just not liking this one that much. I don't know if it's level design or I've just played too much Battlefield recently. I don't think its balancing is good. I think they still need to remove jets. I just don't like it.
My whole thing is with Battlefield, I really, really, really commend DICE for Levolution. I mean, granted, your mileage may vary in terms of how much it impacts the game depending on the map you're on. But I think, that's a real step in a positive direction, especially for a game like Battlefield that takes place on such a large scale. I think more multiplayer shooters need to focus on interacting with the environment in some way. Because, we talk about Levolution, but also, I mean, there's some small things in Battlefield 4 that are really fun. For instance, Siege of Shanghai, you can pull up those barriers that block off the bridge. Basically, you force players out of their vehicles to drop the barriers. It's small things like that that really make a difference. Unfortunately for me, Battlefield 4 really, first of all, they need to stop kidding themselves. No more single player. Battlefield started, as a multiplayer only game, and I think it would be best for DICE to focus their resources on giving us 20 maps at launch and making it a multiplayer only game rather than kind of cobbling together a single player tech demo. And they really need to launch a game that works. I was just so pissed off because I spent 8-10 hours playing, the multiplayer, and I was like level 2 because my games kept crashing or I kept disconnecting before the round would finish. Therefore, I wouldn't get any of the experience I had earned during that match, so I couldn't gain levels. I mean, you need to be level 10 to actually start assignments. You need to be level 10 to play as the commander. So, to have that slow progression out of the start really turned me off. And I'm sure it turned a lot of people away from the game. And I really think that EA needs to learn their lesson because really Battlefield 4 is a great opportunity for EA to shit all over Activision and Call of Duty, and they kind of dropped the ball in a sense. I mean, it was such a rocky launch.
Yeah, but no one's really talking about Call of Duty Ghosts either. So,
that's what I'm saying. Like, they had the perfect opportunity to launch a really solid, really great game to earn basically all those Call of Duty fanboys and make Battlefield a franchise that, frankly, I think it deserves to be. I think, in terms of a gameplay standpoint, I don't think that there is a better multiplayer shooter than Battlefield 4 in terms of being able to work with your team, to work with your squad, the game modes, the number of players. I mean, it's just heads and shoulders above other multiplayer shooters, and I don't understand why games like Call of Duty still have the fan base that they have. And I think, like I said, this is a great opportunity for EA to show people who maybe only play Call of Duty that, hey, we got a really great game here. You should check it out.
It's Twitch gaming versus strategy. I mean, it's much harder. Call of Duty, you can kind of just run in, lone wolf everything, and just go for a high KDR. You can do that in Battlefield too, but that's not going to typically win you a game unless you're playing deathmatch. It's just kind of a different mindset between which game you play. The Levolution and oh, go ahead.
It's babies versus men. If you're a baby, if you want to play a game that's all about Twitch gaming, you're a man. If you
I didn't want to get that insulting, but
yeah. I'm not going to spare anyone's feelings here.
But, I mean, the Levolution is awesome. The problem with it with me is, like, as soon as I have it, I want more of it. I would kind of piss, like, every level only had one big thing that could happen. It'd be nice if there was a few different things that could happen. It's like, oh, we're playing Shanghai. We're just going to wait for the skyscraper to come down. It'll eventually come down. It'd be nice if every time I played the game, they could kind of do something different. I know it's harder for the developers to do that, but it would just make more variety in each game I play. And when they release the China Rising map pack too. They didn't really have Levolution, and then I like missed it entirely. So it's one of those things that's awesome they put it in there, but it sucks when it's not in.
Yeah, even I think Val and Josh, we played it together, even with the DLC maps, Dead Rising or China Rising. I didn't see any Levolution as I can tell.
The thing with those that you guys like, well, Josh was very annoyed by it, but I really didn't care because one thing I do like about Battlefield is like most of their maps are always well structured, and I could do without the Levolution. I could go back to, if they like brought most of the maps over from like Battlefield 3, I would be okay with that because they were well made.
But the problem is, though, we're talking about, you know, moving the franchise forward, and if you're going to move the franchise forward and you're going to add features, you need to be thorough enough to make sure that that feature is strong enough that you can incorporate it in all your maps and you can carry that through and make that a staple of your franchise. When I first saw Battlefield 4, I was kind of like put off by it because I didn't think that there's going to be much different about it. When I saw Levolution, that made me believe that, you know, wow, you know, they're really doing something new with Battlefield, and this has me excited about the game. So that needs to be a key feature for me, you know, going forward. Even if, you know, the vanilla map design is strong, that's something I think that could set it heads and shoulders above any other game that comes out.
I don't think the maps in general, despite Levolution, are stronger than Battlefield 3 maps. Like, every one of the maps, each of the points feels like it's part of the same map, if that makes any sense. Where Battlefield 3, all the maps kind of had a natural evolution normally. You know, Metro, if you're doing Rush or Conquest, each of the points had a feel to it that was different than the other one. Like, you'd start in the park, and then you'd go underneath in a subway, and then you go up in a town, and then you go to a skyscraper. You know, each part felt different, and the gameplay radically changed between each area that you attacked in, like Rush or Conquest. With these new maps, everything is much more open. They're kind of more designed towards Battlefield 2. They got a few structures up there. You can get in the structures, but it's a lot more open, and each point doesn't feel as unique as it did in Battlefield 3 and the older map. There's less verticality, too. Like, what was that map where you could jump off the cliff?
Yeah, Donovan Peak. Yeah, we were discussing this. The fan favorites never actually, I don't really understand. That was an amazing map.
Well, look how much that map changes from point to point. You know, you start off at a base defending against an uphill opponent. The opponents are coming down on you, and you're defending your objective against. And then the next point, they're jumping from cliffs and coming down when you're in a big military installation, and then you fight them in a tunnel. Drastically changes from each point what you're defending. And this one, it doesn't feel like it's changing as much. It just feels like the same.
I didn't really play a whole lot of Rush on Battlefield 4. I played mostly Conquest, and I feel like, in general, because I completely agree and understand what you're saying, and that was something that really kind of struck me as being a huge positive for Battlefield 3 when I first played the beta and played Operation Metro. And, you know, you go from a wide open park, you have a number of attack options, you have a number of ways you could get to your objectives, and then, you know, you're thrown in a constricted and confined area where your enemy knows where you're coming from, pretty much. I mean, there are very few deviations you can make, and it completely changes, you know, the feel of point-to-point combat. But I feel like Battlefield 4's maps are, in general, designed with Conquest in mind. They're really strong when you're playing Conquest, and I could see where there would be problems when you switch over to Rush, where there isn't that kind of change in pace that you get with some of Battlefield 3's maps.
It worked well with Conquest, too, because each point you would kind of defend differently. Some points you'd be able to bottleneck them, some points you're wide open. You know, I liked that a lot more than the way it is in Battlefield 4. Everything just feels a lot more open. You get shot from a lot more directions at once.
I still feel that in Battlefield 4, like, each point in Conquest feels really different. That's what kind of blew my mind, you know, when I first played Siege of Shanghai, because, you know, you have that, there's that point that's actually underground, like in that, I don't know what the hell it is, but, you know, you go on that sub-level and it has the skyline on top. And then there's also, of course, the skyscraper, which everyone's, like, basically spawns and goes on a beeline. They jump into a chopper and, you know, head for that because it's such a key point to have, because it gives you a lot of strategic options. Like, I think that that's still there in Conquest, and I could see where in Rush it doesn't quite have that same amount of variation.
As far as Battlefield 4 is concerned, I mean, I haven't played it, but you've spent the last 10 to 15 minutes talking about the multiplayer elements. Would you be happy to sacrifice the single player and just import the maps from the other games?
Oh, yeah. That's Battlefield 1942, the original on PC, was all multiplayer, and they need to go back to the roots. So just screw...
single player is a chore. And no one, I don't think anyone buys it for the single player. I mean, if there is
No,
someone out there, I
absolutely
feel
not.
sorry for him. But it's, I do the single player to unlock whatever I got unlocked for it and get like the achievement to just run through the game real quick and kind of get a tech demo of what it's going to be like. But it's a chore. It's not something I typically enjoy more than the first hour.
Yeah, it's almost as if the single player is there to act as something to go to when the live service is down, isn't it?
No, I don't even know why it's there. I would go to another game. I wouldn't play single player if I'm doing something else. I'll go outside.
Very true.
I
Yeah,
still
'cause
haven't
I mean,
even finished the single player. It's just a chore.
I haven't even finished it. I've been playing multiplayer.
Yeah, I mean it's only 7 missions long. It's really short. It's easy to breeze through, if you have the stomach for it. But I mean, after
Yeah,
the
but that
second
says
mission,
something though. 7 missions.
That's what I
haven't even
mean.
Completed the 2.
That's what I'm
and
saying. I
look
mean,
at
that's my point. That's my point. It's like you wouldn't really have to try to go through the game, to be honest with you, in terms of its length. And it basically peaks at the second mission. Like the second mission to me was really cool. I really liked, from a tech standpoint again, going up in that skyscraper, blowing out the windows, having the wind
Yeah,
rush
that's what I was
through,
saying.
carry. I'm like, this is really fucking cool. This is awesome. And then I moved to the next level. I'm like, okay. They kind of quit designing the levels and just decided to throw a bunch of commies at me, and I just have to mow them all down. And again, if they would strip single player out, I mean, hiring people like Michael K. Williams, who's a fantastic actor, but hiring him to do the voice, like, how much money could they have saved if they didn't do that, and then they just said, okay, let's develop.
Yeah, how much resources went, how much time, money, effort that they could have used for the multiplayer and made the multiplayer have twice as many levels, have that extra evolution, or be that much better if they just release it as a multiplayer. They wasted a ton of the resources developing a useless single player game that no one gives a shit about, except maybe some 6-year-old that gets it for Christmas. Like who cares?
I mean, and here's my take on it too. If DICE wants to work on single player, reserve that for the Bad Company franchise. Bad Company was the first Battlefield to have a single player, and I'm totally fine if they want to dabble in single player with the Bad Company franchise, because they've already said, there's at some point going to be a Bad Company 3. So we know that's
Just get rid of
like I said, if they want to dabble in single player, fine, do that in a sub franchise basically. And the core Battlefield franchise, leave it as a multiplayer only game. I think it would be a much better experience if they would focus on that, and maybe hire a few extra beta testers so that the game comes out and actually works.
Just basically just come out with a multiplayer and skip the campaign.
Yeah, like all the old Battlefields before Bad Company. But Bad Company also introduced, destructible terrain and stuff like that.
Yeah, it was a good idea. Single player was.
I didn't mind the campaigns for Bad Company. I enjoyed them more than the 3 and 4.
Alright, final game that's on a few lists is Dead Rising 3. VerticalSprite, what do you think about that?
Well, I think when it came out, it got a bad press. I was reading a lot of reviews. It was getting 6 and 7s out of 10. I played Forza, enjoyed it, but in the end, it was Dead Rising 3 that's given me the most fun. It's just a bloody fun game.
We're going to review that pretty soon, and I mean, it's going to get a 6 to 7. It wasn't that fun. I mean, it was fun, but it to me, it lasted like an extra 15 hours too.
To me, I'm playing through it right now. I'm about 2/3 of the way through it, and it seems that it's taken all the frustration out of it. As a game, I think technically it's brilliant, because it's the small touches, like if you give a torch to the person that helps you, then they get the light source and you get to see where the light's shining for them. Little touches like that's only available on next gen. But as far as the actual game's concerned, I haven't got frustrated with it once. And the amount of creative mayhem that it can cause, I don't know, I think it's just got a bad press, and very few games cause me just to sit there smiling at the carnage on the screen, but that is one of them.
I think Dead Rising 3 is kind of interesting. I think it'll be a bit polarizing, because I think if you're a fan of the old Dead Rising games, I think you're probably going to really dislike Dead Rising 3, because it streamlines a lot of things that I think aficionados of the original games really appreciated. Because I mean, the time factor was like the biggest thing in the original Dead Rising games. You had to come up with a very strict plan if you wanted to get through the game and rescue everyone and do whatever.
The problem with me is It is too fucking easy. I mean, it's just a really, really easy game. Nathan and I played through it cooperatively. And also the achievements are bugged in it, which is really annoying. We did a 100% playthrough, and we only got credit for each thing that we individually picked up, and then it locks your save file, and you can't go pick it up by yourself. So that's brilliant. But, I mean, the game is really easy. The old Dead Rising games, I kind of liked a little bit of frustration. Sometimes it got to be too much with micromanaging all the different timelines and everything, and trying to rescue everybody. You'd have to plan out. It's like running a Resident Evil 90-minute or 120-minute run on the old Resident Evil games. You'd actually have to kind of figure it out before you do it. This game, you have plenty of time to do it, but the combat is just, after you get a few weapons you like, it's completely mindless. You can store everything in a weapons locker. You can just grab a couple weapons every time you pass an area that you've gotten and just run around with like the elemental staff and just electrocute hundreds of zombies. And once you can use every card, you know, it just becomes a complete joke to play through that game. There's not enough variety in the enemy types either.
I do agree to a point. That the one thing I will say is, and it might sound a strange comparison, but I would compare it to Call of Duty Ghosts in the sense that when that was released, that's more of the same. Dead Rising 3, they seem to have listened to feedback. You know, it's more agile, a lot quicker. I don't know. I mean, you say it's a lot more streamlined, and I totally agree with that, but I think it's streamlined for the better.
Originally, I sort of thought the same as VerticalSprite. Like, when I first started playing it, that, oh, this game's amazing. There's so many different creative ways to kill all the zombies. But after a while, it just became really tedious and repetitive for me. Like, when we played through it co-op, we didn't even die once for the entirety of our playthrough. When the other Dead Rising games were notoriously hard, and, you know, we were hoping to get a bit of a challenge out of it. It's just really repetitive. You can find a couple overpowered weapons, and then you basically always have those weapons. You get an unlimited supply of them at those cabinets, so you can just run around with like the flaming death scythe and kill like 1,000 zombies instantly, and just always have those on you. And
to be clear, we didn't play together. Like, we play cooperatively, but I'd be in one city, he'd be in another one. Like, we weren't just relying on each other.
Yeah, we were just like running around in completely different areas, and it was still like way too easy when those games are supposed to be hard. The game in general just felt really tedious and repetitive, killing all the zombies. There wasn't enough variation in the enemies. There was only like 3 different enemies in total. There wasn't really a huge difference between daytime and nighttime. Like, they're a little bit more aggressive, but it really didn't get any more difficult. The highlight of the game, though, for me was the psycho missions. I really enjoyed those. Like, that's the only thing that pretty much made the game playable for me, were those psycho missions. They were really well done.
I was going to say, for me personally, it's one of the few games, and this is by no means down to the quality of the game. It's one of the few games that you love or hate, and you can't put your finger on it. You either love it or you hate it, don't you? And Dead Rising 3 is one of those.
I mean, I actually had it on as number 10 on my top 10 list. I mean, needless to say, after about 8 or 9, there's a pretty steep drop off on my top 10. But I put it on there because of the first third or first half of the game or whatever. The first day or two Nathan and I played it, I was having a lot of fun. It was pretty much before we broke the game. And once we broke the game, it just kind of became stupid. And when we were just finishing everything to do 100%, and we were running back and forth across the city, just driving over thousands of zombies or just running through them and, you know, not even bothering to kill them because you just get to a point in the game, there's no challenge. And if there's no challenge, the game's like 30 hours long if you go for 100% completion, 20 or 30 hours. And when 10 hours of that or whatever has no challenge at all, you know, it just becomes a grind.
Yeah. And one thing I'll mention is VerticalSprite. If you're 2/3 of the way through the game, it gets a lot worse. The last third of the game is by far the worst. Like, it really goes downhill towards the end. The ending's awful.
Ah, dear, you see, that's the problem. I'm just gone into overtime mode at the moment, and as I've playing it, I've just had a smile on my face, but I can see if there are cracks starting to appear. I can understand what you're saying.
Oh, if you're in overtime, though, I mean, you don't have longer. The overtime's a little disappointing, but yeah.
Spoiler
I think
alert.
maybe it's down to the next gen of it. The things that bring a smile to my face were the things like just driving down a street and you got all the zombies clinging to the top of the car and the side of the car. But I know that it's going to be very short-lived because of the novelty of next gen. You know, give it a couple of months and then you're used to these new graphics.
I mean, I had a smile on my face the first 10 hours, and then I just that smile work. I can only do that kind of thing so many times, and I found the city very interesting. Another reason I did it, I actually put it on my list, was the city was really interesting. I liked exploring it. I liked finding everything. There's little tweaks they could have made that would have made the game so much better, and it would have made it a lot of fun if they maybe cut it down in length a little bit or tighten some of the quests up. Some of the quests that have you just drive across the city to give something to someone else, they need to be taken out. It's a fetch quest. They need to make the game more difficult or have a more difficult mode. The nightmare mode's not very difficult either, so I don't even know why they need to have like a true Dead Rising difficulty. They need to have more enemy variety. I mean, it's Capcom. They're attached to Resident Evil, and they have Street Fighter and all these other references, but they have no Resident Evil references in a zombie game. I mean, throw some of the Resident Evil monsters in there or something, or just have more than 3 to 5 different enemies you fight. Put 20 or 30. There needs to be a pretty significant count, and strategies and weapon types that work against certain enemies better than others. They took out the food system. You don't need to. I never carried food with me. If I got low on life, I would just find a cafe and eat. There's no challenge, and with no challenge, there's just not any reward in beating it or getting anything. And the fact that it's bugged and doesn't even give you your reward for beating it properly is pretty bad. But it was fun for the first half. It's a game I have. If they just fix those few things, it could be an amazing game. But it's easy things to fix.
Yeah, that's the problem, when a game could reach such greatness when it's just little things that I'm stopping it from doing it.
Yeah, exactly.
You just need to make like every single zombie in Dead Rising the same as a Crimson Head from the Resident Evil 1 GameCube remake. Then it'll be a good game.
Yeah, it'd be a little difficult. But I mean, the whole appeal of the old games was it was like a survival. It was a survival game. You'd go around, you'd scavenge things, you'd build things. You had a limited amount of materials. Like in the first one, things didn't really respawn. Food in an area wouldn't respawn. So you had a limited amount of things that you craft in your area. And this one, everything respawns. You can have infinite spawns with the best weapon by every locker. There's no strategy. I could just run straight through the middle of 1,000 zombies. I didn't need to take the roofs. I didn't need to take any creative path. I could use a vehicle if I wanted to get there faster, but I didn't need a vehicle. You can just go plow through thousands of zombies with no problem, and it doesn't challenge you at any point. And after the first few hours, and it could have been good. It could have been a really good game.
Yeah. One thing I'll admit, going back to VerticalSprite's earlier comment, is the amount of things on the screen at one time animated is really impressive. Like, you can definitely see the next-gen potential. Like, when you're just driving down the street and you have, like, 1,000 different zombies all animated and moving at one time in different patterns on the screen, it's impressive.
Yeah, there's explosions and stuff going on. They're blowing up in front of you and all sorts of particle effects and stuff, and you're still running, full frames per second, 30 or 60, whatever it runs at.
It's 30.
30. It's impressive, though. There's no slowdown.
It's definitely technically impressive in that sense. Like, the overall graphics aren't that great, but just the amount of stuff going on at one time is ridiculous.
There's no load screens. That's a huge improvement over the first. Every area was segmented. You go to a new area, you'd have to go through a load screen. This one, it's just seamless. You load into the world, you can go to every city, and there's no load screen. The good points.
The actual cutscenes in Dead Rising 3 and in a lot of Capcom games, they're really, really good. It's just a shame that the actual games aren't up to the same standard.
Yeah, it had some good cutscenes, and the psycho scenes were all hilarious. I mean, that was Nathan's high point and one of my high points.
Yeah, to me, the only reason to play Dead Rising 3 is for the psychos. They make the game.
Alright, so now we've talked over those 5 games. Anyone have any other games we looked over that are on a few lists? We'll touch base on games people had on their list, but for the 9 and 10 position, anyone have anything? No. Alright, so it's between, again, Gone Home, Battlefield 4, Injustice, DMC, and Dead Rising.
Splinter Cell.
And Splinter Cell. Okay, yeah. For me, 9 for me would be DMC, 10 would be Splinter Cell.
I choose the same ones.
I'm fine with
9 is Gone Home.
I would have to say 9 is Gone Home as well.
What about 10?
For me, 10, I would have to go DMC.
And 10 for you, Trent?
I'd probably go with Blacklist over DMC.
Okay, so Splinter Cell's a solid 10. So we have 3 for DMC, 2 for Gone Home. Andrew?
Yeah, 9 DMC, 10 Blacklist.
Alright, so other games on people's lists that you wanted to mention. Trent, you had Guacamelee and the Swapper.
Yeah, I really enjoyed the hell out of Guacamelee. I thought it was a really great Metroidvania game. Yeah. Basically, what I really enjoyed about it is a lot of Metroidvania games don't really emphasize platforming so much. And I thought Guacamelee did a really great job of integrating its combat mechanics into its platforming. And what I mean by that, if you haven't played it, is basically any special move you get also helps you traverse throughout the environment. So it becomes a really cohesive experience. It's really funny. It's really lighthearted. Has great style. What made the Swapper great to me was the fact that its game mechanics tied into its narrative from a thematic standpoint, which is really rare in a game. The only problem with the Swapper, though, was it was kind of short and a lot of its puzzles were really easy. It was like the last handful of puzzles that were really, really taxed your brain, but still a really memorable game for me this past year.
Nathan, did you have anything we glossed over?
Not really.
Or anyone else play those?
Pretty much my list exactly is what the overall list turned out to be.
Any games you played, Val, that you think are noteworthy?
I really liked Ascension, God of War Ascension. I think it was, even though the combat was a step down from God of War 3, it had a better narrative. Kratos wasn't just looking for vengeance and trying to take down Mount Olympus. The entire time he was unsure what was going on. And the way the story was developed was well done. The multiplayer was also amazing, was great. I thought it was completely different from what other multiplayer games I played, especially with the melee combat. You're able to like go through all these arenas with all these trapdoors, and playing as a team was key to winning the match. The guy with most kills could easily lose to a team that worked together, and it was completely different from what other multiplayer games I've played that were focused on melee.
For me, the only one I had on there, and it was just because I put games exclusively that I played, was Assassin's Creed 4. I skipped the last two on purpose because I get bored of those games if I play too many of them in succession, and once a year is way too much. It's a fun pirate game. There's not a whole lot of games that involve pirates, even though it's a fun thing to be. Naval combat's a whole lot of fun. The land sections are pretty boring, but the graphics and everything in the world's pretty impressive.
Don't you just wish that they dropped the whole Assassin's Creed thing and just made it a proper pirate game?
Yeah, I do. I mean, I've spent probably 60% of the game just naval combat and exploring and stuff. I really don't like going on land and doing the easy combat. Shark hunting, whale hunting, white whale hunting. Done all that, killing legendary ships, killed a few of those last night. That was fun. I just started playing it because it's a game I just felt like I'd be a pirate for a while.
The sheer amount of content in that game is definitely impressive. There's a lot of stuff to do.
And for kids, Lego Marvel's good. It's the best Lego game yet. It's kind of like Assassin's Creed. It's a big open world game with 15 structured levels, a bunch of puzzles, mini games. In many ways better than Assassin's Creed. Andrew, last chance to defend DuckTales and Need for Speed Rivals.
No, I won't.
DuckTales, why is it game of the year? Why is it the number 5 game this year?
I don't know. It's more nostalgia than anything, I guess. Remastering a game from an 8-bit era, this is really how you do remake a game for sure. They've really overhauled the designs, music, and the gameplay as well. It's so much fun.
And VerticalSprite, you had a few games, Contrast, Borderlands 2 DLC. I mean, Borderlands 2 is an amazing game. Nathan and I both love that game. Batman, Arkham Origins, and Wolf Among Us. Tell us about each of those.
Okay, well, I'll concentrate on Contrast and Borderlands 2 DLC. Everybody knows about the Wolf Among Us and Batman Arkham Origins. The reason I put the Borderlands 2 DLC in was because it was one of the few DLCs that not just... it expanded on the entire, on the entire scene of Borderlands 2. It was like over 8 hours long and absolutely epic. And it was tongue-in-cheek as well. It was self-aware of what it was trying to do. So that alone, you're playing it, you're laughing. It's just a fantastic piece of DLC that was totally worth the money. As for Contrast, in this day and age, you've got your FPSs, you've got your puzzle games. The first time you play Portal 2, and it takes you by shock, just the physics of it, or the first time that you play something like Bioshock using the plasmids, Contrast has that same kind of thing. Basically, you're an imaginary character on a 3D plane that you can switch to a 2D plane, and every single puzzle is different. And even though the game isn't the best out there, it's certainly one that opens your eyes to new possibilities and teaches you a new way to think. And for that on its own, that's why it made my list.
All right, and we'll finish up the conversation with what you liked from the last year, what your final thoughts of the year, and what you're not looking forward to into next year, problems you saw come up this year.
So I kind of alluded to this when I talked about Metro, talked about Gun Home, and talked about Bioshock. But I really like the fact that it seems as though developers are trying to make their narratives more interactive, trying to put players at the center of the narrative and allow them to play through events instead of giving us expository cutscenes or additional supplemental files or whatever. As far as things that have me kind of worried about the industry, and actually VerticalSprite has a video on this, microtransactions. To me, the absolute worst part about a game is having to buy it. And don't get me wrong, I buy all my games, but I hate the idea of I spend $60 on a game. I start going through it. I realize, the game may be fun, or I may run into a game that causes me to grind, and then I get a pop-up window that tells me I can spend however much money to get some item or whatever I need to advance further. And this is, if you need microtransactions to fund a smaller indie game, fine. If you need microtransactions because that's your business plan, a free download plus, and then you're going to fund the game on microtransactions, fine. But seeing a $60 game come out like Forza, knowing you've got to grind through races in effort to get a $6 million Lotus F1 car, that to me is that's a really dubious business practice, and it kind of ruins the rest of the game. I mean, when you have to sit and grind and spend an absurd amount of time and effort to do something that in a previous game was just simple progression. I think that we're going to see a lot of shakeups in terms of how we buy games. I think people are going to or companies will become more creative in terms of either releasing games episodically, kind of like what Telltale is doing, or Killer Instinct, where basically you buy individual characters, or you can buy a season pass, and there'll be several season passes. We're going to see a lot of different things, and unfortunately, I think that a number of them are going to be detrimental to the game itself.
My thing I'm worried about for next year is exactly that, microtransactions, and going forward. The games that I can think of that are recently, they've been pretty bad culprits of it, Mass Effect 3, Dead Space 3, Forza, Grand Theft Auto Online, and Gran Turismo. All those games can, shove it. When it comes to microtransactions, it's ridiculous that I pay $60 for a game, plus I pay for the DLC, which I'm fine with paying for DLC. When you've gone and worked for it and developed that content, they deserve to be paid for their time. I'll pay for additional content. But when I'm paying for stuff that's just deliberately made into a grind that should be easily obtainable on the disc or reasonably obtainable, they can shove it. It's ridiculous. I mean, you could spend that car you talked about. How long would it take to get that legitimately? I mean, it's roughly 500 races to buy it.
Well,
an average
they
of
have
5-10 minutes a race.
I will say I played recently and they did patch. So when you level your driver level up, instead of getting 15 grand, you get 30 grand, which is a little bit better. But then again, 10 grand per race. Let's say you get 30 grand every 10 races. You're still taking a long time to get that car.
It's probably at least a week playtime to get one car. I mean, there's a lot of games that are starting to do this, and it's amazing the ones that are so transparent about it too. Like Forza, Forza 5. There was 4 games before it that we know how leveling works up in these games. We know how much these cars cost and how much money you're supposed to get. There's been precedent set before now. I'm used to playing a Forza game, and when I level up, I get a free car. And when I get level 50, I get one of the best cars that would cost me $3-5 million or whatever to buy. So going from a game where it's the same game and it's the same series, and then suddenly being depraved of all that and having to pay a significant amount of real money to unlock that shit is amazing. And Grand Theft Auto, who their online function, they realized people could figure out how to make money too fast in their game, and they decreased the amount you earn from races by 8 times. It's like an 80%, 90% decrease in funds that you earn from everything. If people figured out how to make a lot of money from a shooting mission, they would patch that. Instead of fixing their game and adding more content, they would repeatedly just make it so it takes longer to get stuff. And the biggest patch came right after they released the shark cards, which you could use to buy things. You would pay real money to get in-game money. So when they have it somewhat balanced at the beginning and they patch it to be more and more bullshit and encourage microtransactions, inexcusable. It really says a lot about the developer. And, you know, I'm afraid that Microsoft, the fact they're doing this on their launch titles is ridiculous. I'm hoping that they realize, you know, there's enough outcry that they realize that we're not stupid.
No, let's make the distinction. It's not the developer, it's the publisher that's pushing this.
I'm hoping it's just going to be a fad that passes. Like if you look back at the start of the previous generation with like the Xbox 360 and PS3, in-game advertising for full $60 titles was common. Like I remember playing, what was it, Rainbow Six Vegas, and they had a
Huge post
filled with like MLG posters, and they had like, you know, Coca-Cola ads and everything like all over the game after you spent $60 to buy the game.
Every car is a Dodge Charger.
Yeah, and a lot of games around that time period were doing that for, you know, a few months, and obviously they pissed off the community and it stopped. So hopefully the same trend will follow now. That you know, they'll do this for a couple months, realize that you know, everyone sees through their bullshit, and they stop doing it. At least I hope so.
But that's what worries me. I mean, are there enough people that are engaged in microtransactions to make it worth keeping it around? Like, that's really what'll determine whether or not this is normal or not.
I can't imagine Forza is successful in microtransactions. I'm the first guy to blow money on stupid shit for games. Like, and I think it's complete bullshit. Like, I'll get the premium pack for Battlefield on day one. You know, I get that kind of stuff. And if it doesn't work on me, like, I don't know who would pay $50 of real money so they could buy a few cars in Forza, or, you know, $40 or whatever. You know, there's a point in Forza where it's not even a microtransaction. You're paying a lot of money for something in that game. It's not 99 cents. You can spend thousands of dollars in that game getting everything if you don't want to grind, and if you have an obsession of collecting all the cars. It's insane. Like, I can't imagine it's that successful. The only one that's really worked on me, and I think it's been pretty successful, is Mass Effect 3, and I know that worked on Nathan as well.
Yeah.
But that was kind of like a fun mini game almost, because you'd get like packs, and you didn't know what you'd get when you'd open it up, and it was kind of addicting in that aspect. But, you know, I dropped maybe $100 on that.
Surprisingly, the multiplayer was actually the best aspect of Mass Effect 3, something that I was not looking forward to at all. Because, you know, I play the Mass Effect games for the story, and although the you know, the ending was a letdown, the multiplayer in that was great. I enjoyed it.
Yeah, not the multiplayer, but yeah, I mean, I'm the type of person that threw $100 at that. Nathan threw $100 at that, and then we see this in Forza and other games, and it's like, who the hell gets? If it doesn't work on us, like, who the hell does it work on?
Yeah, I don't know.
Farmville people.
Yeah, maybe. I don't know. Like, they're getting really greedy with it.
In terms of 2013 as a whole, I think it was kind of a bad year for gaming. Like, there really hasn't been that many great games come out this year. Like, a lot of games with a lot of hype surrounding them that, you know, were very anticipated. You expected them to be amazing, like Grand Theft Auto 5 and The Last of Us. And to me, they were decent, but they really didn't live up to that hype.
Yeah, there was a lot of expectation going into this year. I mean, the big thing is we finally got new consoles. It was a big year for indie games. Indie games are getting more recognized every year recently.
I was just going to make that point, though, that actually I think it was a pretty successful year for indie games. We didn't mention it. Unfortunately, we didn't really get a chance to spend enough time with it, but, I mean, Papers, Please was kind of intriguing and interesting. You had Swapper, Guacamelee, Gone Home. I mean, there are a lot of really strong indie titles.
Yeah, I mean, the highlight for big titles, I'd say, is new consoles. I mean, they finally came out. The hardware was getting ancient. But yeah, a lot of mild disappointments. A few big disappointments, Dead Space 3 being one of them.
Yeah. The consoles themselves were a pretty big disappointment for me, too.
Yeah.
The launch titles really weren't that great. Like, I mean...
Yeah, they're all mediocre.
They weren't bad, but, yeah, there's nothing that really stands out to me.
And software's still buggy. Well, Andrew?
I'll go back to what you guys were talking about, the microtransactions, but one of my pet peeves is the whole free-to-play games thing. I can't play those. And I've tried, and after a while it's just like, I want to get this stuff, but I don't want to play so long to get it.
It's kind of piggybacking on the microtransactions, except it's a little more acceptable because they're more justified because that's how they make money with a game. You didn't pay $60 and then they screw you for every nickel and dime. You know, they make their money by charging you the microtransactions and giving you the game for free. But yeah, I mean, it's not a model I'm a fan of, but I understand.
But I'd rather just pay $60 and play the game.
A lot of these games aren't worth $60. They know.
Yeah, no. I mean, that's kind of the point I was making. The worst part about the game is buying it, watching your account drop 10, 15, 20, $60, whatever it costs. But the problem with free-to-play is, like, right out of the gate, you're basically having to like, screw over the game design in an effort to make money. You have to make it a chore to play your game so that you can hope that someone will drop the cash to get whatever it is that they need to progress. Like, that's just insane. Like, that ruins the appeal of gaming to me. Like, I don't understand it. I don't understand why you would want to, I gotta pay $10 so I can get, this thing that'll allow me to earn a 300% experience for the next 3 or 4 hours so that I can, level and move. I mean, it's just insane. Why would you do that?
Andrew, anything?
Yeah,
DuckTales highlight. Are you concerned about the remake of Goof Troop?
I think this is just a basic overline of the gaming industry as a whole. I think we have put expectations so high that I think we need to go back and to really go back to the roots of what it was. We need to look what made gaming so much fun. The characters, the level design, the art design, the music, everything it was simple, and you look back, yeah, that was an amazing game. Today, they're putting so much complexity into these that they have conjured such bigger standards and imagination for us, gamers that have grown up from those old days that we expect so much. And I think the industry is doing its best to do something, but I think what it really needs to do is go back to its roots, and this year was an attempt to do that, but I think it didn't do what it was supposed to.
I mean, expanding on that, I don't think we need to lower our expectations by any means. That would just lower the bar of developers.
No means whatsoever.
But I kind of get what you're saying. I mean, the problem is mass appeal with what you're saying on why we think older games are great, and there's a reason, because that game was made to sell, but it wasn't made to appeal to 10 million people.
Well, yeah, the numbers are so lopsided now. I mean, when you have a game like Call of Duty that's able to come out and sell, 10 million copies day one, like, unfortunately for publishers, like, that's the new standard. They need a game that also sells 10 million copies. And 2 years prior, it might have been okay to have a game that comes out and sells 2 million copies first day.
And this being the case, genres of games are just becoming kind of a soup. You can't get a survival horror game. You can't get an old strategy game. Platforming games are harder to find that are just pure platforming. You've got to have these games that have pieces of every other game in them. They've got to have a little bit of an action. They've got to have the big blockbuster aspects, so it has a broader appeal to a larger audience, so they get more money. And as games get more expensive, they have to have that. That's where the strength of indie developers are. But AAA guys could have a little more guts too and make a AAA game that's has more focus. It takes its time with pacing. It builds to something. It doesn't have to throw set piece after set piece on you. It gets really old. It can have puzzles and shit. People don't like puzzles because people are stupid. Some people don't want to deal with a puzzle because they can't solve it, or they think it takes too long, or it ruins the pace of the game. We don't have that kind of stuff in games anymore because it doesn't have the broadest appeal. And that's the problem with games, not our expectation.
And I completely agree with that. Our game needs to have more brains than bronze. Absolutely.
You can have the bronze games out there, but don't make every game like that game. Every once in a while I just want to play a game, I run and shoot and kill everything. That's fine. But that doesn't need to be every other game, and aspects of that game don't need to intrude in the games that didn't originally have it. And games don't necessarily have more features today than they used to. A lot of games, Time Splitters being one of them, look how many features that series had in every one of those games. There's hundreds of hours of gameplay in those, and level creators, tons of multiplayer matches, 150 characters, challenge mode, an extensive campaign that you could play through multiple times in different ways. You look at certain older games, and they had way more content than any of the games out here today. A big game that has like a bunch of collectibles and stuff isn't content. It's just placing things on a map they already made and trying to get you to spend more time finding stuff.
On a positive note, this year and hopefully the next year is big support for indie and third-party games, which is a big push for many, and I I support that.
Consoles are getting behind them a lot more. This generation, that should definitely help them out. Creates a broader sales appeal. Helps Microsoft and Sony out, and it helps the indie developers because they're going to be able to sell their games to more people. It's a win-win. I don't understand why they didn't do it.
Well, the problem has been, because here's the difference between the PC ecosystem and the console ecosystem. Microsoft, Sony, and Nintendo control everything that ends up on their console. I mean, anything that's on Xbox Live, PlayStation Network, or WiiWare, or whatever the hell they call it now. I mean, they own that space. It's theirs. The PC, it's open to anyone. So long as you can create the content, create a website where you can deliver a game to someone, you can do that. And of course, most indie developers, their goal is to go through Steam, since that'll reach the most PC gamers. But when you're a small developer and you have to change or patch a game, and it costs you to go through Sony or Microsoft to approve those patches or changes, and when Sony or Microsoft take such a huge cut from you, it gets to the point where it's not worth spending the time to make your game for a console. And I think that's something that Microsoft and Sony have had to address. And not only because they have to address those things for indie developers, but going forward with games that require persistent updates or content changes or patches or whatever. Games like Destiny, where Bungie said they're going to release that game and they're going to work on that game for 10 years, adding content, updates, etc. You can't keep charging. You can't have a game like that where you have to pay every time you're going to patch that particular title. So I think it's a culture change for the consoles, and it's something that they're going to have to adapt to and change.
Yeah, and before anyone comments on our forums, the reason we didn't have Super Mario 3D World is because of Nintendo's strict copyright policy. And VerticalSprite concerns, things you enjoyed this year.
Okay, well, the things I enjoyed this year were definitely games that take risks. I certainly enjoyed games like Contrast, which I mentioned earlier, and games such as things like Gone Home and Papers, Please. I've played that as well. These are all games that bring a fresh experience, things that I haven't seen before, things that I haven't played before. They're just new takes, and I hope that with next gen, that the only thing that they don't push is things like graphics and soundtracks. I hope they don't get lazy in game design. I want to see fresh experiences, and with the new hardware, I'm hoping that there's new things to come with it. What does worry me, and this might be just a UK thing, I'm not sure whether it goes on to America as well, is that as the graphics get better, or as the gameplay gets better, a lot of attention gets drawn to the violence in video games, and only this week papers are picking up on the violence in things like Rise or GTA 5. And what I would like to see is definitely a clear definition between children's games, things like Tearaway or, like you mentioned, Super Mario, and adult games, things like I mentioned, Rise or Outlast. All of these games that are brilliant, but they are definitely geared towards adults.
Yeah, in the United States, we definitely have a problem with private media kind of bringing concern and stirring up controversy, but we don't have censors or any kind of censorship in the same way that the UK does, or Australia. I know Australia is probably the worst place for game censorship. I know Germany is also really bad, and it's just unfortunate that grown gamers can't get the uncut, uncensored, full experience, or they're getting that experience is going to be threatened by potential censorship issues.
We also kind of have the opposite problem. It's kind of a problem that a 6 or 7 year old can play GTA 5.
In the UK at least, I don't think it's against the law at the moment, but we do have like a rating system which is very similar to the movies. And what you find is that the customers, they go up to the counter and they say, well, sorry, you're too young. So then the child will go to the mum, and then the mum will buy it for him. And it's not the game's fault for being violent, it's the parents that they're at fault for not actually looking into the content of the game.
Yeah,
exactly.
The exact same issue.
Yeah, you go on GTA Online and you got a bunch of little kids playing. It's like, gee, your parents let you play this shit?
I think it ultimately depends on the person, too. If it's a stupid child, they'll be influenced by it. If they're intelligent, then it doesn't really matter at what age they're exposed to anything.
I didn't hear a whole lot of intelligent ones on there, though. All right, I think that wraps up our discussion. We just want to have this discussion to explain why we come to our top 10. Our top 10 will be in another video. Thought it'd be a cool thing to do. If you like this discussion, make sure to like and subscribe to us. Thanks to VerticalSprite for joining us. You can check out his channel, VerticalSprite.
Thank you very much for having me, folks.
keep watching and stay tuned for more updates into 2014.